She had $47 left. That was the night she stopped running the math and just drove. 3 hours into the Nevada desert. No plan, no backup. Just a grainy photograph on a dying laptop and an address at the end of a dirt road that went nowhere. What she found wasn't what she was looking for. Behind a wall that shouldn't have been that thick. Behind a button no one had pressed in 87 years. Something that had been waiting. Patient. Silent. The kind of secret that gets people killed. Someone already knew she'd found it. The black van appeared on the ridge at 7 in the morning. It was still there at noon. She had $47 left. That was it. That was the whole number. $47. A 2009 Toyota Corolla with a cracked side mirror, 2 garbage bags of clothes in the back seat, and a nursing license that expired in 6 weeks if she didn't find $340 for the renewal fee. That was Claire Hartley at 34. Not what she'd planned. Obviously not what she'd planned. But plans had stopped mattering around the time Kevin emptied their joint account on a Tuesday morning and drove his truck south on I-5 without leaving a note. Without leaving anything, actually. Just the debt. Just the silence. Just the apartment lease, in both their names that she couldn't afford alone, and the landlord who stopped being understanding right around month 3. She hadn't told anyone. That was the thing people didn't understand about being broke. It was quiet. It happened in small increments: the coffee you stopped buying, the gym membership you cancelled, the friend's birthday dinner you couldn't attend. Then the bigger things. Then the silence when your phone gets a number you don't recognize, and you already know what it is before you answer. She'd been living in her car for 11 days. 11 days in a hospital parking structure in Carson City, close enough to her job that she could walk in clean, changed in the staff bathroom, hair done in the mirror above the sink. Nobody knew. She was good at that now. The performance of fine. The maintenance of a face that said everything was ordinary when nothing was ordinary at all. Her shift ended at 11. She sat in the driver's seat of the Corolla and ran the numbers again. She'd been running them every night, like maybe they'd change. Like the math would finally decide to cooperate. They didn't change. They never changed. Rent deposit for any apartment in a 50-mile radius, minimum $1,800. First month on top of that. 2 months minimum before she could afford the nursing renewal fee. She had $47 and a car that burned oil. She opened her laptop on the steering wheel. The battery was at 12%. She had the charger, but the outlet in the parking structure closest to her spot was broken, and the next closest one was on level 4. And something about parking on level 4 at midnight felt like a line she wasn't ready to cross yet. She typed into the search bar. Not optimistically, just because she needed to do something with her hands that wasn't crying. Rooms for rent, Carson City, Nevada, under $300 a month. Nothing real. There was never anything real. Rooms for rent, Silver Springs, Nevada. Nothing. Alternative housing, Nevada. And that was when she found it. Not because she was looking for it specifically. Because she'd clicked through 17 pages of results, and her eyes were blurring, and her battery was at 9%, and she just stopped on a listing that didn't look like the others. It was on a regional classified site she'd never heard of. The kind that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2004, with the mismatched fonts and the banner ads that weren't even loading correctly. And there, between a listing for used farm equipment and someone selling a horse trailer, 1,938 Union Pacific passenger rail car, Carson Valley, Nevada. Private property, as is condition. 500 or best offer. Serious inquiries only, 1 photo. Grainy, taken in the mid-morning by the angle of the light. A toa tau no, a train car sitting on a short section of track in what looked like open desert, surrounded by sagebrush and dry grass, and nothing else for what looked like a long way. The paint was faded to a color that might have once been dark blue. The windows were dirty. The whole thing listed slightly to the left, though that might have been the camera angle, but it was solid. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She could see it was solid. Claire stared at the photo for a full 2 minutes, which was longer than she'd given anything in weeks, maybe months. It wasn't a house. It wasn't even close to a house. It was an 87-year-old passenger train car sitting in the Nevada desert on a section of track that appeared to go exactly nowhere. But it had 4 walls. It had a roof. And according to the listing, It had electrical hookup and well water access already run to the property. $500 was what she had. Minus 47, approximately. Which was not that. Obviously not that. Except she was going to lose the apartment deposit she'd already paid anyway, which was $600 she was never getting back. Which meant in terms of money she would actually see again. She basically had 47. And a train month? Car was 500. She should have closed the laptop. She should have gone to sleep. She should have done approximately 40 things other than what she actually did, which was pick up her phone and call the number in the listing at 6:15 in the morning. 4 rings. 5. She was already preparing her apology for calling so early when someone picked up. Yeah. Not hello. Just yeah. The voice was a woman's. Older, sandpaper and certainty, and something that sounded like she'd been awake for a while already. Hi. Claire's voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. I'm calling about the train car. The 1938 Union Pacific in Carson Valley. Is it still available? A pause. Not a confused pause. More like an assessing one. You serious? The woman said. Most people think it's a joke. I'm serious. Claire looked at the photo still open on her laptop. The gray morning light in the parking structure fell on the screen and made the train car look silver. Very serious. Is it available? Another pause. Shorter this time. Yeah, it's available. Been trying to sell the damn thing 2 years. A beat. You want to come see it? And that was how Claire Hartley, 34, broke, 11 days into sleeping in her Corolla, said yes to driving into the Nevada desert to look at something that was definitely not a house and absolutely could not solve her problems and was in every measurable way a terrible idea. She said yes anyway. Because $47. Because she was tired. Because when the math doesn't work, no matter how many times you run it, sometimes you stop running the math and you just drive. She drove 3 hours east and then southeast into the Basin Valley country, where the mountains pulled back from each other, and the land went wide and open and golden in the early morning light. She'd been this way once before, years ago, on a road trip she'd taken the summer after nursing school with a friend she'd since lost touch with. She remembered thinking then that Nevada looked like the end of the world. Not the bad kind. The kind where things got quiet. It still looked like that. She followed the directions to a dirt road that left the county highway and wound through sagebrush country for what her odometer told her was 1.8 miles, but felt longer because the road was corrugated and the Corolla's suspension was not what it used to be. Dust came up behind her in a low orange cloud, and the mountains ahead were dark blue in the shadow of early clouds, and there were ravens sitting on a fence line watching her pass without apparent concern. And then she came around a low rise, and there it was. Even from 200 yards she could see. It was larger than she'd expected. 50 feet, maybe more. The dark blue paint was almost gone in places, sun-bleached down to bare metal that had gone the color of rust and sand. The windows, and there were a lot of them, 3 on each side that she could see, were filmed with years of desert dust. One was cracked in a long diagonal line. But the frame was level. The wheels were still on the track. The track itself was only about 30 feet of it. Original or replacement, she couldn't tell, but it was solid enough that the car hadn't shifted or listed or sunk. A pickup truck was already parked in the flat area beside the track. A woman stood next to it, arms crossed, watching Claire pull up. Dorothy Weston was 78 years old, and she looked like the kind of woman who had outlasted everything that had tried to outlast her. Silver hair braided down her back. Jeans that had been washed so many times they'd faded to a color between blue and gray. Work boots that weren't for show. Her face was deeply lined from decades of Nevada sun and wind, but her eyes were sharp and immediate, and they went over Claire the way you'd assess a structure, looking for the weaknesses, looking for what would hold. You must be the one who called at 6 in the morning, she said. I'm sorry about that. Don't be. I was up. Dorothy extended her hand and her grip was firm and quick. Dot. Most people call me Dot. Claire Hartley. Dot looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the Corolla. The garbage bags in the back seat were visible through the window. Claire watched Dot's eyes register them and make the calculation. Dot didn't say anything about it. You want to see inside, Dot said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The door was on the near side, and it took Dot a moment with a ring of brass keys. 3 of them before the right one found the lock. The hinges hadn't been used in a long time, and they said so, loudly. A sound like something that had been holding its breath, finally letting it out. The smell hit Claire first. Musty in the way of old books left in a closed room. Old wood and metal and time sealed up together. And underneath that something else. Something she couldn't immediately name. Cedar, maybe. Or the particular dryness of desert air that had been trapped inside for years. She stepped in and stopped. She'd expected ruin. She'd told herself to expect ruin, to keep the bar low, to not let the weird hope she'd been carrying since 6 in the morning turn into actual hope, because actual hope was dangerous, and she'd already been disappointed enough times in the past 18 months to fill a calendar. But it wasn't ruin. The bench seats ran down both walls, burgundy leather cracked with age but still holding its shape, still holding the memory of its purpose. The ceiling curved above her in dark paneled wood, the grain still visible under the dust, the wood still sound. At the far end was a small area that might have been a service station once, with built-in cabinets and a narrow counter and hooks on the wall, where things had once hung. The afternoon light, it was past noon now. She'd been driving since before 6 came through the dirty windows in long strips and lit the dust motes in the air and turned everything a color between gold and amber. It was beautiful, in the way that old things that have survived things are beautiful. Not pretty, not comfortable, but real in a way that most things aren't. Harold bought this in 1987, Dot said from behind her. She walked the length of the car with the measured step of someone who'd done it before. Paid $800 for it at an estate auction. Said he was going to restore it, make it a studio or a guest house or something. She paused at the far end and looked out the window at the sagebrush and the mountains. That was 38 years ago. He never did. When did he pass? Claire asked. 3 years ago. Dot said it without performance. Just fact. Heart attack. He wasn't young. I told him every winter. She turned from the window. You planning to live in this thing? There was no point in the lie. Claire looked at her. Yes. Dot held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once. Thought so, she said. Only people who call that serious are the ones who need it to be. She walked to the window nearest them and looked out at the land beyond the track. 20 acres. Hers since 1979, since she and Harold had bought it the year their daughter Meg was born. Her kids wanted her to sell it. Wanted her to move to Reno, to a retirement community with organized activities and handrails in the bathrooms. She wasn't ready for handrails. $500 for the car, Dot said. $50 a month for the land. That includes the well water and the electrical hookup. Harold ran out here in 2001. I can't promise the wiring is to any modern code, but it works. Claire did the math in approximately half a second. $50 a month was less than she spent on gas in a week. Had spent. Before. That she stopped. Why? Dot looked at her with those sharp, steady eyes. Because Harold would have wanted someone actually using it. Because I'm tired of looking at something rusting. She paused. And because you drove out here at 6 in the morning with your life in 2 garbage bags, and you didn't flinch when you walked in that door. That means something. Claire looked at the cracked leather seats, at the light coming through the dirty windows, at the built-in cabinets at the far end that could hold things. That could hold her things. She thought about the parking structure, about the bathroom mirror and the careful performance of ordinary. About $47. I'll take it, she said. Dot nodded. Got the paperwork in the truck. They signed it on the hood of Dot's pickup with a pen that skipped twice and had to be shaken. 3 brass keys on a ring. A handwritten bill of sale. $500 in cash that Claire had driven to the ATM for, before she left the parking structure that morning, the last withdrawal that took her account to 47. Her hands weren't shaking. She made sure of that. Dot showed her the water pump, a hand pump connected to the well line Harold had run, functional, cold and clear when Claire worked it. The electrical panel was on the outside of the car, a gray metal box with a padlock. The hookup to the property's generator worked. One of the breakers was old, but it held. Wood stove, Dot said, pointing to the small iron stove Harold had installed in the service area at the far end. Gets cold out here at night. Even summer. Desert cold is different than city cold. I know, Claire said, though she didn't, not yet. Dot drove away in her truck at 2 in the afternoon, taillights disappearing around the curve of the dirt road, and Claire stood in the open door of the train car and listened to the silence of the Nevada desert, which was not actually silence at all. There were birds somewhere in the sagebrush, a wind that came and went, the distant sound of something highway, maybe, far away that she couldn't place, but that made her feel slightly less alone. She had 47 left. She had a train car. She had car insurance for 1 more week, and a nursing license for 6 weeks, and a shift at Carson Valley Hospital starting the following Monday that Meg Weston, Dot's daughter, who it turned out worked in hospital administration, had quietly arranged over the phone. The afternoon Claire had called to say she'd decided to stay. She went back inside and started cleaning. The first week was not a montage. It did not go quickly or feel cinematic. It was hard in the specific, exhausting way that physical labor is hard when you haven't done it in years, when your body has been running on stress and bad sleep and hospital cafeteria food and is not especially interested in also carrying buckets of water and scrubbing 87 years of grime off wooden surfaces. The outhouse was 50 yards from the car. She measured 50 yards at 2 in the morning, in the dark, in the cold, because the desert was cold at night in a way she hadn't fully believed until she felt it was a significant distance. She got a headlamp. She stopped drinking liquids after 8 p.m. She heated water on the camping stove she'd had in the trunk of the Corolla since a camping trip 4 years ago that she and Kevin had taken and that she'd never fully unpacked from, which was probably a metaphor for something she didn't have the energy to examine. She washed in a plastic basin. She arranged her 2 garbage bags of clothes into the built-in cabinets at the far end of the car with the methodical care of someone who has learned that order in your environment is the only thing standing between you and the feeling that everything is falling apart. She kept the wood stove going at night. She'd bought a cord of split wood from a man down the highway who had a hand-painted sign and wouldn't meet her eyes, and she learned to build a fire that would hold until morning. She slept on one of the bench seats with 2 sleeping bags zippered together, and the sound of the desert outside and the creak of the old train car settling in the temperature changes between night and day. She slept better than she had in 3 months. She didn't examine that either. On the 4th day Dot came by. She didn't knock. There was no door to knock on. Claire had left it propped open in the morning for the light. Dot just appeared in the doorway with a cardboard box and looked at what Claire had done with the interior and made a sound that wasn't quite approval but was adjacent to it. Brought some things, Dot said, setting the box down on the nearest bench seat. Blankets that smelled like cedar, a kerosene lamp, 2 cans of paint, deep blue, almost the original color, a small electric hot plate, fabric folded neatly that turned out to be curtain material in a dark green that would work with the wood tones of the interior. You don't have to keep doing this, Claire said. I know that. Dot didn't look at her. Started unfolding the fabric. Harold used to say this car had secrets. Said the right person would find them. She paused, smoothed the fabric with one hand. I thought he was getting sentimental in his old age. He did that sometimes toward the end. Claire looked at her. Secrets how? Dot shrugged. One of those shrugs that's not actually dismissive, just careful. He never said specifically, just that it had been used for things on the old routes. That people left things in it they weren't supposed to. She looked up. He was interested in old railroad history. Spent a lot of time on it in his last years. Did he find anything? Dot looked at her for a moment. He said he thought there was something. Never told me what. Another pause. Harold kept a lot to himself. It wasn't always a good quality. She left an hour later and Claire hung the curtains and the interior of the train car looked, for the first time, like something on purpose. She found the inconsistency on day 11. She'd been working her way through the built-in cabinetry at the service end of the car, the narrow counter, and the cabinets below it and the hooks above, scrubbing everything down to bare wood and then treating it with the linseed oil she'd found in Harold's toolbox. It was the kind of work that required her hands but not much of her mind, and she'd gotten good at that kind of work recently. She was measuring the cabinet below the counter, deciding whether it was deep enough to store her food supplies or just her cleaning materials when she noticed She noticed because she was a nurse. Because nurses learn to measure by touch and by proportion. Because she had spent 12 years looking at bodies and structures and spaces and noticing when the dimensions didn't add up, when something on the outside was telling a different story than what was on the inside. The cabinet interior was 8 inches deep, but the counter above it, she pressed her hand flat against the front edge and measured with her thumb to the wall, was 14 inches thick, maybe 15. She knocked on the back wall of the cabinet. The sound was hollow, unmistakably. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for a moment. Thought about what Dot had said. Harold thought it had secrets. Thought it had been used for things. She examined the cabinet interior the same way she'd examine a patient who wasn't presenting clearly, methodically, without assuming, running her hands along every surface and every seam. The left side, the right, the top edge, the floor. On the left side, near the bottom corner, almost flush with the wood and tarnished, so dark it was nearly invisible, a small brass button. She pressed it. Nothing. She pressed it harder. Nothing. She thought about her grandfather's puzzle box, the one he'd kept on his desk when she was young, the one that had a trick to it, that required not just pushing but a combination of pushing and pulling simultaneously. She'd spent an entire summer at 12 figuring it out. She pressed the button and pulled the back wall of the cabinet toward her at the same time. The panel swung forward on concealed hinges. A soft mechanical click. A small release of air that had been sealed inside, for she didn't know how long enough. The smell that came out was old in a specific way. Dry and close and like paper and metal and something else she couldn't identify. A hidden compartment, 6 inches deep, running the full width of the counter. Inside, 3 bundles wrapped in oilcloth, dusty, stiff with age, and a wooden box no bigger than a hardcover book, dark wood inlaid with a mother-of-pearl geometric pattern, a small brass lock on the front. Claire's hands were not entirely steady when she reached in. She took out the first bundle. The oilcloth crackled as she unwrapped it. The sound was the loudest thing in the train car. Inside was a leather portfolio, dark brown, dry with age, embossed with gold. Lettering that was faded but still readable. Union Pacific Railway Internal Correspondence 1936 1938. She opened it. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges but intact. The writing was typewritten in some places, handwritten in others, in the precise, compact script of someone who'd been trained before keyboards existed. What she read took her 20 minutes. She read it twice. Then she sat back against the counter and pressed her hands flat on the floor of the train car and breathed. Shipping manifests, employee correspondence, a ledger. Not the official ledger, a secondary one, handwritten, that cross-referenced the official shipping records against what had actually been loaded and what had actually arrived. The numbers didn't match, not by a little, by a systematic, deliberate, carefully constructed amount that someone had been skimming for years. Gold bullion, transported on Union Pacific from Nevada mining operations, destined for federal vaults. The discrepancies went back to 1936. Small enough in any single shipment to pass a casual review. Added together, substantial. Added together over 2 years, the kind of number that changed lives. At the bottom of the portfolio, a name appeared repeatedly. In the shipping manifests, in the correspondence, in the ledger with its careful red annotations. Edmund Aldridge, Regional Director, Precious Metals Transport Division, Union Pacific Railway. And at the very bottom of the portfolio, in a handwriting different from the typed document, smaller, more precise. The kind of handwriting that had formed itself under the pressure of doing something carefully in a limited time. The notes of the person who had assembled all of this, who had cross-referenced the manifests, who had kept the secondary ledger, who had, over 18 months, quietly and methodically built a case that could bring down a senior executive of one of the most powerful railway companies in America. Name on the notes, Henry Alderman, Chief Porter, City of Los Angeles Line. The second bundle was photographs, black and white, clear despite their age. Several of the train car itself, when it was new, paint bright, brass fixtures catching light. Everything crisp and formal as train cars were supposed to be in 1938. the kind of photographs taken for company records or advertising. And in several of them, a man, standing beside the car in a porter's uniform, late 30s, maybe early 40s, steady-eyed, not smiling for the camera the way people did when photographs were an event, just standing there with the particular self-possession of someone who knew what he was worth and didn't need anyone else to confirm it. On the back of one photograph, in the same precise handwriting, Henry Alderman, Chief Porter, 1936. City of Los Angeles Line, Union Pacific. The third bundle was a letter. To whoever finds this, it began. April 14, 1938. My name is Henry Alderman. I am the chief porter on the City of Los Angeles route, Union Pacific Railway. I have worked this line for 12 years. I am writing this because I have reason to believe I will not survive the next week. Edmund Aldridge, regional director, has been stealing gold from Union Pacific shipments since 1936. I have documented the theft in the materials enclosed. I reported this theft through internal channels in January of this year. Instead of investigation, I was accused falsely of the discrepancies I had reported. I understand now that Aldridge has enough influence within the company to redirect any internal inquiry away from himself and toward whoever raised the question. I attempted to bring the evidence to federal authorities. Aldridge became aware of my intention. He came to me in person 2 weeks ago and told me, without saying the words directly, that my continued health depended on my silence and my willingness to sign a statement retracting my report. I did not sign. I could not sign. Not because I was brave. I was not particularly brave. But because I had spent 12 years doing this work honestly, and I could not look at the numbers in that ledger and pretend they said something different from what they said. I have hidden the evidence here in the compartment where the porters on this route kept things during the Depression, years' money for emergencies, items passengers forgot and we hoped to return. I know this car. I know its hiding places. I do not believe anyone else does. I am enclosing with this letter a notation of coordinates. There is a location outside Carson City where Aldridge has been storing the accumulated gold, a property that appears in county records as belonging to a holding company, but that I have traced, with the help of a surveyor I trust, to Aldridge's private accounts. The coordinates are precise. I measured them myself. If you find this, Edmund Aldridge is likely still walking free, or he died free. Either way, what I have left here is the record, the real one, the one that says what actually happened. I am not asking for justice for myself. I am past hoping for that. But the truth has a right to exist even when the person who found it doesn't survive the finding. Take this to someone who will use it. Tell them Henry Alderman was not a thief. He was just a man who wouldn't look away. Claire read the letter twice, then a third time. Outside, the Nevada desert was going orange with late afternoon. A raven called from somewhere near the track, and something small moved through the sagebrush, and the wind came in through the propped open door, smelling like dust and dry grass and distance. She opened the wooden box. The small brass key had been in the upper corner of the hidden compartment, pressed into a knot she'd almost missed. It fit the lock. The lid opened. 25 gold coins, each marked with the dates 1936 and 1937. American gold eagles, each 1 ounce. She knew gold prices. Hospitals talked about operating costs, about the cost of things, and she'd absorbed more than she'd intended in 12 years of working in institutions that watched every line item. Around $2,000 an ounce, give or take, depending on the market. $50,000. Sitting in her hand, she set the coins carefully back in the box, and under the coins, folded twice, a small sheet of paper in Henry Alderman's handwriting. Coordinates, a property designation, a note, primary cash. Henderson property, 1 mile northeast, buried 6 feet. 3 stones in triangle formation as marker. 847 ounces. 847 ounces. She sat down on the floor of the train car. The wood was cool through her jeans. The late light came through the window at a low angle and made the dust in the air look like something suspended, like something waiting. She thought about the math. She couldn't help it. 12 years of watching numbers and calculating and figuring out what was possible, the math happened automatically. 847 ounces at $2,000 an ounce was approximately $1.7 million, buried in the Nevada desert, less than a mile from where she was sitting. She pressed both hands flat on the floor of the train car and looked at them. This was a crime scene. That was the first clear thought that made it through. Not about the money, about the man. Henry Alderman had put this here and then gone somewhere and not come back, not because he'd changed his mind. The letter didn't read like a man who changed his mind. It read like a man who knew exactly what was coming and did the thing anyway. She thought about what Dot had said. Harold thought it had secrets. She thought about what she'd felt when she'd first stepped through the door. Not pretty, not comfortable, but real. She needed to think. She needed to be careful. She needed to not do what she would have done at 25, which was run immediately to tell the first person she encountered. Because that impulse, the impulse to share, to involve, to let someone else carry some of the weight had not always served her well. She rewrapped the bundles in their oilcloth. She placed them and the wooden box back in the hidden compartment. She pressed the back panel closed and heard the click of the latch engaging. Then she sat down on the nearest bench seat and looked out the window at the desert, turning gold, and thought about a man named Henry Alderman, who had worked this train car for 12 years and hidden the truth in its walls and never come back for it. 87 years. The truth had been sitting in this wall for 87 years, and it had waited for someone desperate enough to buy a 500 train car, and careful enough to notice the dimensions didn't add up. Claire looked at her hands again. Steer dear now. She picked up her phone and called Dot. Dot arrived 20 minutes after Claire called her. Not alone. Meg Weston was in the passenger seat. 48 years old, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, hair the same silver-streaked auburn as her mother's but cut short and practical, in the way of someone who had stopped having time for impractical things around the age of 32. She worked hospital administration. She was the reason Claire had a job starting Monday. She walked into the train car, looked at the open hidden compartment, looked at the oilcloth bundles on the bench seat, and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then, how long has that been in there? Based on the dates in the documents, Claire said, 87 years. Meg looked at her mother. Dot looked at the wall. Harold knew, Claire said. Not a question. Dot was quiet for a moment. The desert wind moved through the open door. A long moment where nobody said anything and the silence had weight to it. He said the car had secrets, Dot finally said. I thought he meant history. Old roots. Stories. She paused. He spent the last years of his life researching old Union Pacific records. I thought it was just a hobby. Something to do with his hands after he retired. Did he find the compartment? Another pause. Longer. I don't know, Dot said. And she said it in a way that meant she wasn't entirely sure she was telling the truth, or that she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Meg picked up the leather portfolio and read the first 3 pages standing there in the fading afternoon light. Her expression didn't change much. That was the administration in her. The long practice of receiving difficult information without broadcasting it. You need a lawyer, she said. And you need law enforcement. In that order. I need to understand what I have first, Claire said. You have evidence of a murder, Meg said. That's what you have. The word sat in the train car like an object. Heavy. Specific. Not the kind of word you put back in the wall and forget about. Claire already knew that. She'd known it since she read the letter. But hearing it said out loud in Meg Weston's administrator's voice made it more real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. I know someone, Meg said. She was already reaching for phone. Cole Patterson. Best man in Nevada for historical restoration work. Railroad history specifically. Harold mentioned him, said he was the only person who really understood these old cars. A brief pause while she scrolled. More importantly, he's honest. In a field where that's not as common as you'd hope. She made the call. The conversation was brief. Meg explained there was a Union Pacific car, Harold's old one, new owner, something historical found inside. She didn't say more than that on the phone. Whatever Cole Patterson said in response was enough. Tomorrow morning, Meg said after she hung up. He'll drive down from Reno. Claire looked at the hidden compartment. At the panel she'd closed again, the brass button invisible unless you were looking for it. What do I do with it tonight? Meg and Dot looked at each other over Claire's head. One of those looks between a mother and daughter that carries a whole conversation in about 2 seconds. Leave it where it's been, Dot said. It's been safe 87 years. One more night won't hurt. Cole Patterson arrived at 9 the next morning. Claire heard the truck before she saw it, a late model Ford, well maintained in the way that working vehicles are maintained by people who actually work in them, not as an aesthetic choice. He parked beside Dot's truck, which was already there, and got out. 58 years old. That was what Meg had said. He looked it, and he didn't. The face was lined in the way that outdoor work in desert sun, and probably some things that had nothing to do with weather, will line a face. The hair was salt and pepper, cut short. He was lean in the way of someone who'd been physically active long enough that it had become structural rather than effortful. He moved without waste. Every step placed with the economy of someone who had spent a long time in situations where careless movement had consequences. He looked at the train car before he looked at anything else. Just stood there for a moment, 20 feet away. Looking at it the way Claire searched for the comparison and found it the way she looked at a patient she wasn't sure about yet, assessing, not jumping to conclusions. Then he walked over Miss Hartley. His handshake was brief and firm. His eyes, when they met hers, were gray and direct. Cole Patterson. Claire. He nodded once, looked at the car again. 1938 City of Los Angeles line. Union Pacific. He said it almost to himself. Harold Weston had this for 30 years and never restored it. Did you know him? Knew of him? He contacted me about 10 years ago. Said he had a car he was thinking about working on. We talked twice on the phone, then he stopped calling. Cole looked at the door. Can I go in? That's why you're here. He walked through the door and did the same thing Claire had done on day one, stopped. Just inside the threshold, let the space speak before he started taking it apart with analysis. Then he moved, hands on the wood paneling, on the ceiling braces, down to the floor where the boards met the frame. He checked the undercarriage from the outside, lying flat on the ground and using a flashlight. And when he came back up, his shirt had a stripe of dust across the front, and he didn't seem to notice or care. Frame is sound, he said. Better than it has any right to be at this age. Someone reinforced the undercarriage at some point. He looked at Dot. Harold? He did some work on it in the early 90s, Dot said, before he lost interest. Cole nodded. He went to the service end and looked at the built-in cabinets. Claire watched him run his hand along the counter edge. She knew what was coming. Or she thought she did. She showed him the button. He didn't say anything when the panel swung open. Just looked at the hidden compartment for a moment, with the stillness of someone choosing not to react until they understood what they were reacting to. Then she handed him the portfolio. He read standing up. Not skimming. Actually reading. Slowly, with the focus of someone who understood what the documents were saying and was making sure he wasn't misunderstanding. Claire sat on the bench seat across from him and watched the light from the window move across the portfolio pages as he turned them. When he got to the photographs, he stopped. Not a pause. A stop. Complete. The kind of stillness that is not relaxed. He looked at the photograph of Henry Alderman for a long time. Then he did something Claire didn't expect. He reached into the chest pocket of his work shirt and took out his wallet. Old leather, worn thin at the fold. He opened it and removed a photograph of his own, small. Carried so long the edges had gone soft. He held it next to the photograph of Henry Alderman. The same face. Not similar. The same. Different light, different year. Younger in Cole's photograph by what looked like 2 or 3 years. But the same jaw. The same set of the eyes. The same quality of self-possession Claire Kit had noticed in the 1938 photograph. That sense of a man who knew what he was worth without requiring external confirmation. Cole's voice, when he finally spoke, was not entirely steady. Where did you find this? In the bundle with the portfolio. What's his name? In the documents, Henry Alderman. Cole set both photographs down on the bench seat, side by side. He looked at them for a moment. Then he sat down. Not collapsed. Just sat. Like standing suddenly required more resources than were available. My father's name was Thomas Alderman, he said. He was born in November 1938, 6 months after Henry disappeared. He picked up the photograph from his wallet without looking at it. His mother never told him what happened, just that his father had gone away and wasn't coming back, that the name Alderman was something to be ashamed of. Claire sat very still. My father changed his name when he was 19, Cole said. Took his stepfather's surname, Patterson. Said he didn't want to carry something that felt like an accusation. A pause. He died not knowing his father was innocent. My grandmother died not knowing. 3 years ago. He looked at Claire. They both died believing the wrong thing. The train car was absolutely quiet. He didn't leave, Claire said. No, Cole said. He didn't. He picked up the letter, read it himself, quietly holding the paper with both hands. Claire looked out the window. She gave him that. The privacy of reading something that rewrites the story of your family while someone you met yesterday sits 4 feet away. When he set the letter down, his face was composed, but there was something around the edges of it that wasn't. That would take a while to be. She died believing the wrong thing, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then I can't fix that. No, another moment. But I can fix the record. That was the decision. Right there. Claire heard it happen. Not dramatic. Not announced. Just a door closing on one option and a door opening on another. And that was when the trouble started. Because decisions like that, the right ones, the ones that cost something, have a way of attracting the attention of people who would prefer the record stay broken. The disagreement happened that afternoon. Dot had gone back to the house. Meg had left for work. It was just Claire and Cole and the portfolio spread across the bench seats in the late afternoon light. And Cole was saying they should go directly to the Nevada State Archives. Not law enforcement, handle it as a historical matter first. If we go historical first, we lose the criminal component, Claire said. Edmund Aldridge murdered someone. That needs to go to law enforcement. Going to law enforcement means press. Press means Preston Aldridge sees this before we've established the evidentiary chain. And waiting means she started again. I don't have time to wait, Cole. I have 6 weeks on my nursing license. I have $47. I'm living in a train car. He looked at her. I know that, he said. It wasn't dismissive. It was something harder than dismissive. Acknowledgement. And I'm telling you that if we move too fast and this gets discredited, if Aldridge's lawyers get to this before the documentation is solid, then my grandmother died believing a lie and it stays a lie, publicly. Claire opened her mouth, closed it, because he wasn't wrong. That was the problem. He wasn't wrong and she wasn't wrong and they needed different things and both of the things they needed were real. 1 week, she said. We build the evidentiary chain. Get forensics on the documents. Get a lawyer in before we go to Pollard. Ray Pollard? Meg mentioned him. Historical Crimes Unit. Cole considered 1 week. And we bring in Frank Deering before we bring in anyone else. Who's Deering? Former DA. Does historical property law now. If anyone knows how to structure this so it doesn't get eaten alive in court, it's him. They called Deering that evening. He came out the following morning, driving a sensible sedan and wearing the kind of clothes that said he'd stopped trying to look impressive sometime around his 45th birthday and found the whole thing considerably less stressful. 50 years old, reading everything twice, asking questions that seemed sideways until you realized they were actually going directly at the structural weakness in whatever you'd just said. He read the portfolio, then the letter, then the coordinates notation. Edmund Aldridge, he said. He said it the way Cole had said the name Henry Alderman, recognizing something. You know it? Claire asked. Aldridge Mining Corporation is one of the 5 largest private mineral operations in Nevada. Preston Aldridge III is the current CEO. His great-grandfather founded it. Deering took his glasses off and cleaned them with his shirt. Put them back on. Edmund Aldridge died in 1952. Wealthy, respected, endowed a library in Carson City. Building still has his name on it. The silence in the train car had a specific quality after that, the kind that follows the moment when you understand exactly the size of what you're dealing with. What are Claire's legal options? Cole asked. Deering looked at the photographs, at the letter, at the coordinates. If the gold at those coordinates exists and can be recovered, Nevada treasure trove law gives the finder 70%. 30 to the property. He paused. But that's the simple part. The complicated part is that Preston Aldridge is going to fight this. and he has resources to fight it with. What does he have to fight? Claire said. The documents are real. The murder can't be prosecuted, Deering said. Edmund's been dead 73 years. What can happen is the historical record. And for a family like the Aldridges, the historical record is worth fighting for. He was right about that faster than any of them expected. The phone call came 2 days later. Claire was at the hospital 4 hours into her first real shift, when her cell phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She stepped into the hallway, answered. Miss Hartley. The voice was the kind of smooth that takes practice, the kind that's been professionally maintained. My name is Preston Aldridge. I understand you've recently found some old documents in a train car you purchased. She said nothing. I'd like to discuss this privately, Aldridge continued. I think you'll find I can make your current situation considerably more comfortable. Shall we say $150,000? No questions, and we consider this matter resolved? Claire looked down the hospital hallway. White walls, the squeak of a cartwheel somewhere. Everything ordinary and fluorescent and real. Those documents aren't mine to sell, she said. A pause. Brief. The kind of pause that recalculates. Miss Hartley. They belong to the historical record, and to the family of Henry Alderman. Another pause. Longer. When Preston Aldridge spoke again, the smooth was still there, but something else was underneath it now. Something that had edges. You're making a significant mistake, he said. I'd encourage you to think very carefully about that. She ended the call, stood in the hallway for a moment. Her heart was going faster than she'd like, but her hands were still. She went back to her patient. She told Cole that evening. His response was immediate. Get Deering on the phone. Document the contact attempt. Do not speak to Aldridge again without counsel present, all of which she'd already done or planned to do. What she didn't expect was the look on his face when she described the conversation. Not surprised. Something more specific than that. He moved fast, Cole said. 2 days. He has people watching. Ray Pollard confirmed that when Claire called him the next morning. Mid-50s, weathered, the kind of calm that comes from having spent a career in rooms where people were not calm. He was with the Nevada State Police Historical Crimes Unit. Meg had given Claire his number 3 days ago and said he was the person you called when something was old and complicated and mattered. He listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, I need to see the documents. When can you come? This afternoon. He came with a forensics technician who spent 2 hours photographing everything, every page of the portfolio, every photograph, the letter twice, the coordinates notation, the gold coins, the wooden box, the hidden compartment itself, from multiple angles. Then he interviewed Claire for another hour, formally, with a recorder. Before he left, he stood in the door of the train car and looked out at the desert in the early evening light. Edmund Aldridge was well connected in his day. Son of a senator, son-in-law of a federal judge. If Henry Alderman had made it to federal authorities in San Francisco in 1938, it might not have mattered. He looked back at Claire. Sometimes the system protects itself. What about now? Claire said. Pollard looked at the train car. Now is different. Now I have forensics and a chain of custody, and a woman who documented everything before she called anyone. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to a smile, but it got close. How long were you a nurse? 12 years. That, he said, is obvious. The van appeared on a Thursday. Black. Older model. Parked on a low-rise 300 yards from the train car. Far enough that Claire wouldn't have seen it if she hadn't developed the habit, the necessary habit of looking at everything in her new environment, with the attention you have to pay to things when there are no neighbors and no streetlights, and the nearest gas station is 11 miles away. She noticed it at 7 in the morning. It was still there at noon. At 4 in the afternoon it drove away without her seeing it leave. She looked up and it was just gone, the rise empty against the late sky. She told Cole. He was quiet for a moment. Then he called Pollard. Pollard ran the partial description Claire had given. Called back in 2 hours. Victor Crane. 42, former military. Separated under circumstances that didn't make it into his public record. He specializes in locating things. For private clients. He works for Aldridge, Cole said. No way to prove that. Not yet. Pollard's voice was measured. But Crane doesn't show up without a client and a target. He's not sentimental. Cole drove out the following morning with equipment that fit in 2 large bags and spent 3 hours installing things Claire didn't ask too many questions about. Motion sensors at the perimeter, cameras at 3 angles, an alarm that went to his phone and to Pollard's office. He did it without performance, without explaining more than she needed to know. He just did it. And then he made coffee on the hot plate, and they sat in the train car while the Nevada afternoon went gold outside, and he told her about the Marines. Not the parts that sounded like stories you told. The other parts. I joined because I didn't know what else to do, he said. 22 years old. Thomas Alderman's son. My father was already gone by then. I thought the structure would help, did it? Taught me how to work, how to stay in a situation you can't fully see the edges of and not panic. He looked at the window. The restoration work started after my wife died. 3 years ago, I found out I needed something that required both my hands and a long time. Old trains are like that. Why trains specifically? He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know specifically. I thought it was just practical. The work made sense to me. He paused. Now I think maybe I was working my way towards something without knowing it. He looked at the photograph of Henry Alderman on the bench seat between them. My father never talked about him, Cole said. My grandmother talked about him once, when I was maybe 12. She said her husband had been a man who tried to do right in a time when that cost everything. He picked up the photograph. I didn't know what she meant then. Claire looked at him, looking at the photograph. There were things accumulating between them that neither of them was naming. Not yet. That was fine. Some things needed time to become visible before you acknowledged them. The alarm went off at 2:14 in the morning. Cole's phone first, then the secondary alert Pollard had set up. Claire was awake before the sound fully registered. 11 days of desert living had calibrated her sleep to surface level at any irregular noise. She grabbed her phone. Cole's text was already there. Don't come outside. Stay in the car, I'm watching the feed. She stayed. It was harder than it sounds. On the camera feed Cole sent to her phone shaky. The quality limited by the camera's low light capacity, she could see a figure moving along the side of the train car. Methodical, not rushing. The practiced movement of someone who had done this kind of thing before in places where getting it wrong had consequences. The figure reached the door. Spent 40 seconds on the lock. Claire watched the timer in the corner of the camera feed, and then the door opened. 8 minutes inside. Then the figure came out, shut the door behind them with careful precision, and walked away into the dark without looking back. Cole was there in 12 minutes. He came in through the door and went directly to the hidden compartment without speaking, pressed the button, pulled the panel. He looked at what was inside. Then he looked at Claire. The notebook, he said. The coordinates. Is it gone? Claire was already looking past him. She could see from where she stood. The oilcloth bundles were there. The wooden box was there. But the small notebook, the separate piece, the one with Henry's handwriting and the precise coordinates of the Henderson property cache, was not in the compartment. Gone. Cole leaned against the counter, ran a hand over his face. Then Claire said, "Check the bench seat. Left side." Under the second cushion from the door, he looked at her. She went to the bench seat herself, lifted the cushion. The notebook was there. Henry Alderman's handwriting on the cover. The coordinates inside. She handed it to Cole. 3 days ago, she said. I moved the original, made a copy on the hot plate scanner and put the copy in the compartment. Old nursing habit. She paused. 2 copies, always. Cole held the original notebook. He looked at her. He took a copy, he said. He took a copy and he doesn't know it. There was a moment. A specific kind of moment that is not quite triumph and not quite relief, but something in between, the feeling of having been careful enough, at the right time, in the right way, to have mattered. Then Cole did something Claire didn't expect. He laughed. Not loud, not long, just a short released sound, like something that had been held too tight finally getting a little air. The legal papers arrived on a Monday morning. Claire was in the middle of a shift when Meg called. She stepped into the hallway again. This was becoming her spot. This stretch of a hallway between the nursing station and room 14. This particular piece of fluorescent lit ordinary where she received the news that kept reshaping her life. Preston Aldridge filed this morning, Meg said. defamation and document falsification. 2.4 million in damages. Claire looked at the wall. White paint. A small scuff mark at shoulder height where someone had pushed past too quickly with a supply cart. Frank Deering, she said. Already called. He says don't respond to anything. Don't talk to anyone from Aldridge's team. He's filing a motion by Thursday. Okay. Claire, I'm okay. She finished the shift. She did not leave early. She completed her charting, checked on her patients, handed off clean to the evening nurse with clear notes, and walked out to her car in the hospital parking lot at 7:15 in the evening. She sat in the Corolla for a moment. $2.4 million. Her. The woman who'd had $47 6 weeks ago. The woman who was technically still living in a train car, though the train car now had curtains and a functioning wood stove, and a coffee setup that she was genuinely proud of. She could walk away. Still. Technically. She hadn't made anything public yet. Pollard had the documents, but nothing had been filed. Nothing had been announced. She could call Deering and tell him to reach out to Aldridge's lawyers and see what the number was now, after the lawsuit threat. $150,000 was the opening offer. It was probably not the ceiling. She drove back to the train car. Cole's truck was already there. He'd heard from Pollard. He was sitting on the steps of the train car with 2 cups of coffee from the thermos he kept in his truck, and he handed her one when she got out of the Corolla, without saying anything. They sat in the cooling evening air. The sky was going purple at the edges. I can walk away, she said. I know. Financially it would make sense. I know, he said again. And I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your house. Your $47. Your risk. She looked at him. What would you do? He looked at the train car, at the blue paint she'd put on the near end, testing the color, seeing how the original had looked before the sun took it. My grandmother believed a lie for 80 years. My father carried shame that wasn't his. I carried something I couldn't name, that turned out to be the echo of it. He paused. I would not walk away. But that's me. Claire drank her coffee. The Nevada evening came down around them. Stars beginning at the edges of the sky. The smell of sage and cold air and the particular cleanness of desert nights that she'd come to look forward to in a way she hadn't expected. Henry Alderman didn't walk away, she said, and he knew what it was going to cost him. He did. I'm not walking away, she said it quietly, without performance. The way you say the things that are already decided. Cole didn't say anything. He just nodded once, slowly, and they sat there until the coffee was finished and the stars were fully out, and the desert was dark and still and enormous around them. Frank Deering filed his motion on a Thursday morning. Preston Aldridge's lawyers responded by Friday afternoon, which meant they'd had the response prepared before Deering filed, which meant they'd been expecting the motion, which meant someone in Aldridge's organization was tracking every step with the kind of attention you only pay when you're genuinely worried about what's coming. Deering noted that, said it was actually useful information. Claire didn't find it comforting. The legal calendar moved the way legal calendars move, which is to say slowly, expensively, and with complete indifference to the fact that Claire's nursing license renewal deadline was now 3 weeks away, and she still needed $340 that she technically had, but was afraid to spend because she didn't know what was coming next, and financial caution was one of the few things she had actual control over. She worked her shifts. She came home to the train car. She made coffee on the hot plate and sat with the case files. Deering sent her and read them at the small table she'd built from a piece of plywood and 2 sawhorses that Cole had found in Dot's barn. Cole came by most evenings. Not always announced. Sometimes she'd look up from the files, and his truck would be outside, and he'd be doing something useful, checking the motion sensors, examining the undercarriage of the train car for the restoration assessment he was building, sitting on the steps with coffee already made. She stopped being surprised by it after the first week. What she didn't stop being surprised by was the feeling she got when the truck wasn't there, a particular kind of noticing the absence of something, which was inconvenient, which was not what she had time for, which she filed under things to examine later when later arrived. Later had not yet arrived. There were more pressing items on the agenda. Frank Deering called on a Tuesday morning at 7:45. Claire was in the car between the train car and the hospital, the Nevada highway wide and empty in the early light. "We have a problem," he said. She pulled over. "Because you pull over for those words when you're driving." "What kind?" "The hidden compartment." Cole found something else in it. Cole had been doing the full structural assessment of the service end of the car, the careful disassembly and documentation that a proper restoration required, when he found the second panel. Not the obvious one. Not the one Claire had found with the brass button. A different one. Smaller. More deeply concealed, behind a section of decorative molding that ran along the upper wall at the service end, the kind of detail you only noticed if you were taking the space apart with the specific attention of someone who understood what they were looking for. Behind the molding, a shallow horizontal space, 8 inches tall, running 2 feet along the wall. Inside the space, a notebook. Not the coordinates notebook, different, smaller. 47 pages of handwriting that was Henry Alderman's, but not the careful, formal handwriting of the portfolio documents. This was faster, more pressured. The handwriting of someone writing quickly, writing privately, writing for himself rather than for evidence. Henry Alderman's personal journal. From the last months of 1937 through May of 1938. Cole called Claire from the train car, and she left work 20 minutes into her break and drove back to find him sitting on the bench seat with the notebook open on his knees and an expression on his face that she recognized by now, the one that meant he was holding something that cost him to hold. She sat across from him, waited. He knew who told Aldridge, Cole said. She waited. His name is George Sutton. Henry had known him since 1930. They started on the same route the same year. Sutton was the one who recommended Henry for the chief porter position. Cole looked at the notebook. Henry writes that Sutton came to him in March of 1938. Said he was worried. Said he'd heard things. Henry trusted him. He told Sutton what he had and what he was planning to do with it. He stopped, and Sutton told Aldridge. Henry figured it out 3 weeks later, when Aldridge came to him directly. The only person outside Henry who knew the specifics of what he had and what he was planning was Sutton. The train car was very quiet. He wrote it on April 9th, Cole said, 2 weeks before he wrote the letter we found. He knew, and he stopped again, set the notebook down on the bench seat with a care that was almost ceremonial, stood up. "I need a minute." He went outside. Claire sat with the notebook. She didn't read it. It wasn't hers to read right now, but she looked at it. At the cover, which was plain brown cardboard, soft with age. At the way Henry Alderman's handwriting was visible through the front page, the impressions of the pen going through. He knew his friend had betrayed him. He knew it for weeks before he died. And he still went to San Francisco. Still made the appointment with the federal authorities. Still left the evidence in the hidden compartment with a letter explaining everything. Not because he was without fear. The journal, according to Cole's description, was full of fear. He'd written it. He hadn't hidden it from himself. But fear wasn't the same as stopping. Cole came back in after 12 minutes. Claire knew because she'd counted. He sat back down on the bench seat. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then my grandmother told me once that her father was a man who tried to do right in a time when it cost everything." His voice was steady, careful. "I was 12. I didn't know what she meant." He picked up the notebook again, held it.
"I know now."
Frank Deering came out that afternoon and read the journal with the same methodical care he brought to everything. He flagged 3 entries specifically. The entry from April 9th where Henry identified Sutton. An entry from April 20th describing a direct confrontation with Aldridge. And the final entry, dated May 12th, 4 days before Henry made his scheduled trip to San Francisco for the federal meeting. The last entry was 7 sentences long. Deering read it aloud. "I am afraid. I have been afraid for weeks. I am not ashamed of that. A man who says he is not afraid when he has reason to be is either lying or not paying attention. I paid the rent on the room through June so Margaret will have somewhere when she needs it. I sent what I have to the authorities' contact in advance of the meeting. If I do not arrive, they will have it anyway. I am going because I said I would go." That was the last entry. Deering set the notebook down. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Deering, "This changes the evidentiary picture. significantly. The hearing was set for a Thursday, 3 weeks out. The night before, Deering called Claire at 9 p.m. Not with new information, just to ask if she was ready. She said yes. He said good. Neither of them said anything about the fact that Preston Aldridge's legal team had filed 4 separate motions in the previous 2 weeks, each one designed to delay, to complicate, to make the process more expensive and more exhausting. She went to bed at 10 and lay awake until 1. Not worrying exactly. More like running through it, the documents, the timeline, the journal. Henry's last entry. I am going because I said I would go. She got up at 5, made coffee, sat with the original leather portfolio in her lap, not reading it, just holding it, just keeping company with it. The way you sit with something before you send it out into a world that may not receive it the way it deserves. Cole knocked at 6:15. She opened the door. He had a thermos and a paper bag from the diner in town. She looked at him. Breakfast, he said. She stepped back to let him in. He didn't say anything about the portfolio in her lap. Just set the food on the table and poured coffee into both the cups she already had out, which she realized she'd done automatically. Set out 2 cups, without thinking. That was a thing that had happened at some point. She hadn't noticed when. They ate. They didn't talk much. The desert outside the windows was gray, and then pink and then gold, as the sun came up and the light changed on the walls of the train car, and the old wood paneling seemed to warm from the inside. At 7:30, Cole said, "Ready?" "Yes," Claire said. She meant it. The courthouse was in Carson City. The hearing room was smaller than the movies would have you expect and smelled like recycled air and old carpet. Preston Aldridge was there with 3 lawyers from a firm in Reno, whose suits were notably better than Frank Deering's. Aldridge himself was 40 years old and looked like a man who had always had money, not flashily, but structurally. The way people who have never had to think about money hold their bodies, the ease of someone for whom the floor is always solid. He looked at Claire when she came in. She looked back. He looked away first. His lead attorney's name was Sherwood, and he was practiced and smooth and spent 20 minutes establishing Claire's financial situation in the kind of detail that was designed to imply a motive: the eviction, the car, the train car purchase, the remarkable coincidence of a homeless woman with no assets buying a derelict property and immediately discovering a fortune in historical documents. Claire sat straight, listened, said nothing, because that was what Deering had told her. Let them build the narrative. Don't interrupt it. Let them finish. Then Deering stood up. He did not present a counter-narrative. He made a request. He asked the court to visit the property. Before ruling on the admissibility of any evidence, before hearing expert testimony, he asked Judge Sandra Holt, 62, silver-haired, the kind of face that had heard too many things to be easily impressed by any of them, to come to Carson Valley and see the train car and the hidden compartment herself. Sherwood objected. Of course he objected. Judge Holt looked at Deering, then at Sherwood, then at the portfolio, which was in an evidence bag on the table. Motion granted, she said. Thursday morning, counsel will arrange access. Dot organized it, because Dot organized things. She had coffee ready, which nobody drank because it was a legal proceeding, and drinking coffee felt wrong, and she stood back by the truck with her arms crossed, and her expression neutral, while 8 people filed into the train car that Harold had bought for $800 in 1987 and never fixed. Judge Holt stood in the center of the car and turned slowly, looking at everything: the wood ceiling, the bench seats, the window light, the service end with its built-in cabinets. Deering showed her the hidden compartment, the brass button, the panel swinging open. He didn't say anything, just demonstrated. The judge leaned in and looked at the interior, the 6-inch deep space running the full width of the counter, the dimensions, the construction of the concealment. Then Cole read the letter. Standing in the train car with the original document in his gloved hands and 8 people listening, and the Nevada morning coming through the dirty windows, he read Henry Alderman's letter in a voice that was controlled and precise, and only broke once, on the last sentence. Tell them Henry Alderman was not a thief. Outside, Preston Aldridge was in his car. Black sedan, air conditioning running. He had not come inside. Claire noticed that one of the members of Judge Holt's staff, a woman in her 50s who had been taking notes throughout, looked out the window at the car, then looked back at Cole. Made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Judge Holt said nothing until they were back outside. Then she looked at the train car for a moment in the morning light. "Mr. Deering," she said, "Thursday. We'll hear the full record." The full hearing was 2 days later, 6 hours. Deering presented the forensic authentication paper, dating, ink analysis, handwriting comparison against Union Pacific employment records from the period, cross-referenced with county records and federal shipping archives from 1936 through 1938. The forensics examiner was a woman named Dr. Reyes, who spoke with the unhurried precision of someone who had no interest in being wrong about anything and had arranged not to be. Every document authenticated, every date consistent, every name in the portfolio traceable to actual historical figures with verifiable employment records. Sherwood cross-examined Dr. Reyes for 90 minutes. She answered every question with the same calm. She did not become defensive. She did not equivocate. She had done the work. The work spoke. Deering called Cole to the stand. Sherwood's approach with Cole was different. Skeptical. Pointed. The implication, convenient, that this supposed grandson appears now, after the treasure. Cole answered everything directly. Birth certificate. His father Thomas Alderman's birth certificate, dated November 1938, 6 months after Henry's disappearance. The family photographs. His grandmother's own records, kept with a thoroughness that apparently ran in the Alderman line, including letters describing her search for information about her missing husband. "My father died believing his father abandoned him," Cole said. He was looking at Sherwood. His voice was level. He was wrong, and she died wrong. "I can't change that." He paused. "But I can make sure that the record says what actually happened." Sherwood's last line of attack with Cole: "You stand to benefit financially from this claim. Isn't that correct?" Cole looked at him. "I stand to get my grandfather's name back. That's what I'm here for." The gallery was quiet. Then it was Claire's turn. She'd been preparing for Sherwood for 2 weeks. Deering had run her through it. The financial desperation. The remarkable discovery. The suggestion of motive. She knew exactly what was coming. "You were facing eviction when you purchased the train car," Sherwood said. "Yes." "You had minimal financial resources." "Yes." "And within 2 weeks of purchasing this property, you discovered hidden documents that you claim are worth a considerable amount of money. That I know are authentic historical evidence of a crime," Claire said. "The money is a secondary matter." "Is it?" Sherwood leaned forward slightly. "You're currently living in the train car you purchased. You have a nursing license that required emergency renewal. You have significant debt. And you're telling this court that the financial implications of these documents are secondary to what exactly?" Claire looked at him. "To the fact that a man was murdered, and nobody knew his name for 87 years. She paused. "I'm a nurse. I've sat with people at the end of their lives. The ones who go hardest are the ones who weren't seen, who weren't known. Henry Alderman hid that evidence and walked out of this train car knowing what was coming. The least I can do is make sure it mattered." Sherwood looked at her for a moment, looked at his notes, made a small adjustment to his approach. "You could have sold the documents to Preston Aldridge," he said. "He made you an offer." "He offered me money to be complicit in continuing a cover-up," Claire said. "I declined." Judge Holt made a note. The verdict came the following Tuesday. Not a jury verdict, this was a civil hearing on the admissibility of evidence and the legitimacy of Claire's claim. Judge Holt had the room quiet within 30 seconds of walking in. She ruled for 45 minutes. The documents were authentic. The evidence of Edmund Aldridge's crimes was credible and well established. The personal journal's discovery and the evidentiary chain surrounding it met the standard for historical crime documentation. Henry Alderman's death was, by the preponderance of evidence, a murder committed by or at the direction of Edmund Aldridge to prevent the disclosure of criminal activity. Preston Aldridge's defamation and falsification claims dismissed with prejudice. Claire Hartley's standing as finder and preserver of historical evidence established. The Henderson property excavation, approved under state archaeological oversight. Claire sat at the table and breathed. Just breathed. Deering was writing something. Cole, behind her, put his hand briefly on her shoulder. One touch. Then he moved it. Preston Aldridge stood up when the ruling finished. His attorneys were already conferring in low voices. He looked at Claire across the room. One moment. No expression she could read. Then he walked out. That should have been the end of the threat. It wasn't. The excavation was scheduled for the following Saturday. The Henderson property was accessed through a county road, 3/4 of a mile from the train car. Abandoned ranch buildings on the far end, a scrub grass field in the middle, and on the east side a clearing near an ancient oak with 3 flat stones arranged in a shape that was not natural, a triangle, exactly as Henry had written. Dr. Patricia Morse from the State Archaeological Office ran the excavation team. She was 60 and had the focused, unhurried energy of someone who had dug up the past professionally for 30 years and understood that patience was not optional. Ground-penetrating radar first. Her assistant moved the scanner in careful parallel lines while Morse watched the readout. It took 20 minutes. When the readout showed what it showed, Morse looked up at Claire, then at Cole, then back at the readout. She had the expression of a person whose work had just confirmed something extraordinary and who was choosing to remain professional about it. "There's a large metallic object," she said, "approximately 6 feet down. Dimensions consistent with a strongbox or storage container, 3 feet by 2 feet by 18 inches. The crowd around the perimeter of the excavation site, there were more people there than Claire had expected. Word had traveled the way it does in small communities, made a noise. Not loud. Just a collective exhale. Cole was standing beside Claire, close enough that she could feel the tension in him, the held breath of someone who had been waiting for this confirmation for longer than he knew. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. They both looked at the readout. "We dig," Morse said. "It took 4 hours. Careful work. Trowels and brushes in the upper layers, then more substantial tools deeper down. Each layer photographed. Each soil change documented. The early autumn Nevada sun moved across the sky, and the shadows shifted and the crowd stayed. Dot had brought a folding chair and was sitting in it with her arms crossed, watching with a particular expression of a woman who had kept a secret for 30 years without knowing she was keeping it and was now watching the weight of it finally come up out of the ground. Meg stood beside her. Didn't say anything. Just stood. Ray Pollard was there with 2 other officers, establishing a perimeter, chain of custody ready for whatever came up. Frank Deering was filming on his phone. He'd been filming since before the dig started. At 5 feet, the metal detectors changed pitch. Higher. Insistent. At 5.5 feet, a trowel struck something that was not dirt. The sound carried across the whole site. That specific sound. Metal on metal, old and definitive. Nobody in the crowd said anything. Morse's team worked the final 18 inches with extraordinary care, exposing the top of the container degree by degree, brushing soil back until the whole upper surface was visible. Dark metal, heavily corroded, but the Union Pacific seal embossed deep into the top panel was visible. Still legible. The letters and the railway eagle, still there after 87 years underground. It took the winch system and 4 people to bring it up. The weight estimate, when Morse checked against her equipment, was 420 pounds. Claire was standing at the edge of the excavation when the container cleared the ground. She had her arms crossed and she was not crying. She had decided she was not going to cry. She was going to be present for this. She was going to watch it with clear eyes. She managed it until Cole said quietly, from beside her, he told the truth. "Grandad." That was when she stopped managing. They opened the container on site. Morse insisted on it. Documentation. Chain of custody. Everything in front of witnesses and cameras, and the people who had come to see. The lid was corroded and required significant work. The sound it made coming open was considerable. The sound of something that had been sealed for a very long time finally giving way. Inside, oilcloth partially deteriorated, and beneath the oilcloth, gold bars. Stamped. Union Pacific Railway seal. Dates, 1936 and 1937. Serial number still legible, corroded at the edges but readable. Morse counted aloud. Her team arranged the bars on protective cloth spread on the grass. The crowd counted with her. 10, 20, 30, 34 bars. Each bar stamped with its weight 25 ounces, 850 ounces, which was 3 more than Henry's notation, which meant Aldridge had moved more gold to this location between when Henry documented the coordinates and when Aldridge stopped using it. Claire stood in the Nevada field and looked at 34 gold bars worth approximately $1.7 million at current prices and felt not what she'd expected to feel, not triumphant, not relieved. She felt the weight of 87 years of waiting. She felt Henry Alderman in the train car with his notebook and his careful handwriting and his last entry, and the specific courage of a man who goes anyway. Cole put the photograph in his shirt pocket. His grandfather. He'd been carrying it all day. She knew without asking that he'd taken it out and looked at it when the container broke the surface. She'd seen him do it from the corner of her eye. The gold was photographed, catalogued, transferred to an armored transport with state police escort. The process took 2 hours. Every bar documented, every serial number recorded, chain of custody established from the ground to the vault. When the transport left, the crowd dispersed slowly, the way crowds do when the thing they came for is over, and the return to ordinary life feels slightly surreal. Claire sat down on the grass beside the excavation site. The hole was still there, the earth still disturbed. She sat and looked at it and didn't say anything. Dot came over, sat down beside her in the grass with the careful maneuvering of a 78-year-old who had decided that what she wanted to do was sit on the ground and was going to do it regardless. She didn't say anything either. They sat like that for a few minutes. Harold knew it was here, Dot said finally. He never said it to me directly, but I knew he knew. She paused. I think that's why he kept the car, even when he stopped being able to explain why. Why didn't he tell anyone? Dot was quiet for a moment, because he was afraid, and because he told himself it wasn't his story to tell, and because those two things are sometimes the same thing, even when they're not. Claire looked at the hole in the ground. I'm sorry, Dot said. Not for anything specific, for all of it. For 30 years. For Harold. For whatever version of this should have happened sooner. Claire looked at her. It happened when it was supposed to, she said. And she meant it. Because she'd driven 3 hours into the desert at 6 in the morning, with $47 and 2 garbage bags, and an inability to stop trying, and she had opened a door that had been waiting for someone specific. Maybe it had been waiting for her. She was still sitting on the grass when Deering called. 48 hours, he said. The legal determination on the Henderson property claim and the compensation from the State Historical Crime Legacy Fund. 48 hours to get the paperwork through. She thanked him. Hung up. Cole came and sat beside her. Not Dot's spot the other side. She was flanked. 78-year-old woman on her left, 58-year-old man on her right, and the Nevada sky going pink above the hole in the ground where 87 years of waiting had just come to an end. What are you going to do? Cole asked. Right now I'm going to sit here a little longer, she said. He nodded. Okay. They sat. Victor Crane came to the hospital on a Wednesday afternoon. Not with lawyers. Not with a threat. He walked in and sat in the waiting area like a patient and waited for Claire to have a break, and when she came out and saw him, she stopped walking. He looked different from the cameras, from the surveillance footage. Older, more tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has been doing something for a long time that they are not sure they should be doing. She sat across from him. Not close. Not running. I wanted to say something in person, he said. She waited. I've been finding things for other people for 11 years. Things that weren't mine. Things that weren't theirs either, most of the time. He looked at his hands. I told myself it was just business, salvage work. Historical. Nobody gets hurt. She didn't say anything. I watched what you did in that courthouse, he said. The way you let a dead man speak instead of trying to do it for him. He paused. I hadn't seen anything like that in a long time. Another pause. Maybe ever. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. Set it on the seat between them. Edmund Aldridge had a secondary location. Not in Henry's notebook. A private cache he kept separate because he didn't trust Sutton with it. I found it 3 years ago for a client who never mind. He pushed the paper slightly toward her. Coordinates. It's yours now. She looked at the paper. Didn't pick it up yet. Why? He looked at her for a moment. Because Henry Alderman deserved better than what he got. And so do you. He stood. I'm done with this kind of work. For what that's worth. He left. She sat in the waiting room of the hospital with his coordinates in her hand for a while. Then she called Deering. Then she called Pollard. Then she went back to her patients. The 48 hours became 60. Then 72. Legal clocks, Deering explained. They always ran slower than anyone wanted. On the 4th day, Deering called. Claire was in the train car. Morning light. Coffee. The portfolio in its evidence bag on the shelf where she kept it. Next to Henry's photograph, the copy, because the original was now with Pollard, and the small collection of things she'd accumulated in the past 2 months that made the train car look like somewhere a person lived. Sandra Holt signed off this morning, Deering said. The Historical Crime Legacy Fund is processing the some compensation order. 1.1 million, net of the state's administrative percentage. He paused. The Henderson property estate has also agreed not to contest the finder's claim. They saw the press coverage and apparently decided that fighting a homeless nurse over the moral legacy of an 1,938 murder was not the press narrative they wanted. Claire sat down on the bench seat. 1.1 million, she said. After taxes and my fees, you're looking at approximately $840,000. Give or take, $840,000. She'd had 47 when she drove to Carson Valley. She sat in Henry Alderman's train car, with the morning light coming through the windows she'd cleaned herself. In the space she'd scrubbed clean herself. With the curtains she'd hung herself. And she thought about the night she'd found the listing on a website she'd never heard of. The 12% laptop battery. The cracked side mirror on the Corolla. The particular desperation of 2 in the morning, when the numbers don't change no matter how many times you run them. She thought about Henry, sitting in this same space, hiding the truth in the wall and writing the letter and going anyway. She picked up her phone and called Cole. He answered on the second ring. Deering called, she said. A pause and I need to tell you something. In person. Another pause. Shorter. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She sat with the morning and the coffee and the light and the 47-page journal that had been written by a man who was afraid and went anyway. Who was betrayed and went anyway. Who knew what was coming and went anyway. She sat with all of that, and she started to think about what came next. Cole arrived in 18 minutes. Not 20. 18. Which meant he'd been on the highway already, heading this direction without knowing why. The way people sometimes move toward something before they have the reason for it. Claire heard the truck on the dirt road and opened the door before he pulled up. He looked at her face when he got out. Read it the way he reads structures. Quickly, without assumptions. Good news or complicated news, he said. Both, same news. She told him the number. 1.1 million from the Historical Crime Legacy Fund. 840,000 after Deering's fees and the state's administrative percentage. She said it the way Deering had said it plainly, without decoration, just the number sitting in the air between them. Cole sat down on the bench seat, the same one where he'd first held Henry's letter with both hands. He didn't say anything for a moment, just sat with it. Then, what do you want to do with it? That's why I called you, Claire said. Because some of it isn't mine to decide alone. He looked at her. Henry left the evidence so the truth would come out, she said. The money is a consequence of that. Not the point of it. She sat across from him. The morning light came through the windows she'd cleaned herself, landing in long strips on the wood floor. I want to do something with it that would have made sense to him. Cole was quiet. Outside, a raven called from somewhere near the track. The desert wind moved through the partly open door and brought the smell of sage and cold air and distance. A scholarship, he said. For people like him. People who do the work nobody sees. That's exactly what I was thinking. They sat with the shape of it for a moment. What it could be. What it should be. I want to keep the gold in Nevada, Claire said. Not sell it. Give it to the State Museum. Next to his documents. Cole nodded slowly. He spent 12 years moving things for other people. Gold, goods, passengers. Never owning any of it. He paused. It should stay where it came from. Another moment of quiet. The good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling. There's something else, Claire said. She told him about Crane, the hospital waiting room, the coordinates on the folded paper. The way Crane had looked, not the man from the surveillance footage, not the controlled professional who'd taken 8 minutes inside her train car at 2 in the morning. Someone older, worn through in a specific way, the way people look when they've been doing something they knew was wrong for long enough that the knowing has started to show on the outside. Cole listened without interrupting. We give the coordinates to Pollard, he said. When she finished, that's what I thought. And whatever comes from it goes to the scholarship fund. Yes. He looked at her. There was something in his face that she'd been watching develop over weeks. Not a new thing emerging. An old thing working its way to the surface, the way the railroad seal on the gold container had been there all along, waiting for the right conditions to become visible. You don't have to decide everything today, he said. I know. She looked at her hands. The hands that had found the brass button, that had pulled the panel, that had unwrapped the oilcloth in the afternoon light of a Nevada desert, 11 days after buying a train car with her last $500. But I've spent 2 months reacting. I want to start deciding. He looked at her for a moment. That's different from the woman who called Dot at 6 in the morning. Is it? Little bit, he said. And it was almost a smile. The kind that didn't need to be more than almost. Pollard handled the secondary excavation 3 weeks later. Crane's coordinates led to a decommissioned water storage site outside Carson City. Overgrown, forgotten. The kind of place that becomes invisible when it stops being useful. Morse brought the same team, same patience, same methodical care that made the work look slower than it was. Claire was there. Cole was there. Deering stood at the edge with his phone filming, which had become his contribution to proceedings. Dot had driven herself without telling anyone she was coming, and arrived in her truck 10 minutes after everyone else, got out, crossed her arms, and stood watching with the expression of a woman discharging a debt she'd carried too long. The cache was at 4 feet, smaller than Henderson. A sealed metal box, padlock rusted solid, which Morse's team cut with equipment that looked too modern for what it was opening. Inside, glass tubes, sealed. Each one labeled in handwriting that matched the portfolio documents exactly. Edmund Aldridge's hand, meticulous to the end, even in what he'd hidden. 43 tubes, gold dust, approximately 230 ounces, $460,000. Claire stood and looked at it and thought about Henry knowing this existed, knowing the numbers didn't fully add up. He'd written that in the journal 3 entries, noting the discrepancy between what he could document and what the math said must have been taken. He'd known there was more. He hadn't been able to find it, but he'd left enough for someone else to find everything eventually, which was its own kind of trust. Trusting that eventually would come, that someone would be paying attention when it did. Same as Henderson, Claire told Pollard. State Museum. Next to the rest. Pollard made a note. Didn't make a speech about it. Some things didn't need speeches. They needed to be done and then documented and then done correctly, and then you moved on. Preston Aldridge's lawyers filed a motion 2 days after the secondary cache went public, challenging the provenance of Crane's information, arguing that evidence obtained from a private citizen with a criminal history should be inadmissible in determining disposition of historical assets. Judge Holt dismissed it in 72 hours. In writing, 2 paragraphs. Aldridge's lawyers filed again. Different angle. Same result. 4 days that time, then nothing. The filing stopped. The phone calls to Deering stopped. The pressure that had been constant since Preston's first call, that smooth, maintained, professional pressure, the kind that was designed to exhaust rather than to win, went quiet. Not forgiven. Not resolved in any way that felt like resolution. Just stopped. The way a storm stops. Not because anyone negotiated with it, but because it ran out of what it needed to keep going. Deering told Claire about the second dismissal over the phone while she was between patients at the hospital. She stood in the break room, not the hallway. She'd stopped using the hallway for important phone calls. It seemed important somehow to receive good news somewhere different from where she'd received the hard news. That's the end of it? She said. Practically speaking, Deering said, he could appeal to the state Supreme Court, but the cost-benefit stops making sense at some point, even for Aldridge. The historical record is what it is now. Edmund Aldridge is in it exactly as he should be. She thanked him and went back to her patients. She thought about Preston that evening, not with anger, not with satisfaction either. Exactly. More with the particular clarity you get when something has been concluded correctly. He was going to live with his great-grandfather's name in the permanent historical record of the state of Nevada as a thief and a murderer. He was going to pass that name down. Every building Edmund Aldridge had endowed, every institution that still carried his name, would carry it alongside what he'd actually done. That was consequence enough. The rest was between Preston Aldridge and whatever accounting he had left to do with himself. The scholarship announcement happened on a Friday. Small room, the right people. Deering, Meg. Dot in her good boots, the ones she saved for things that mattered. Pollard in a better jacket than usual. Cole. And Russell Alderman, who had driven down from Wyoming 2 days earlier when Cole called to tell him what was coming. Russell was 80 years old. He'd arrived in a rental car because his daughter had insisted on the flight from Laramie, and he'd agreed on the condition that he drive himself from the airport, which his daughter had apparently accepted as a reasonable compromise. He walked with a cane, but he was straight-shouldered in a way that made the cane look chosen rather than necessary. He had Henry Alderman's jaw. Cole had it too. It was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. Cole had called Claire the night before Russell arrived. My father's family, he said, on the Alderman side. Sarah was Henry's sister. Russell is her grandson. I know, Claire said. Russell told us when he first came. I know you know. A pause. I just wanted to say it out loud. That there's more of them. That it didn't end with Henry. She'd heard something in his voice that she didn't comment on then. A particular quality of a man realizing that the family he'd thought was smaller than it was, had room in it for more than he'd known. At the scholarship announcement, Claire stood at the front of the room without notes. She'd written them. 4 drafts. She'd left them in the train car. Henry Alderman spent 12 years doing work that was essential and invisible, she said. He carried other people's things and kept other people's schedules and made sure other people arrived where they were going. And then he found something wrong, and he tried to make it right, and it cost him everything. She looked at the people in the room. At Dot, whose husband had known the truth for 30 years and hadn't moved. At Russell, who had carried a sealed envelope for 40 years. At Cole, who was the grandson of the man who'd hidden the truth in a wall and walked out into what he already knew was coming. The Henry Alderman Scholarship Fund will support students who are doing the work nobody sees. First-generation college students. Working students. The ones carrying 2 jobs and a full course load and getting up every morning anyway. She paused. $300,000 in the initial endowment. Perpetual. The interest funds it going forward. She looked at Cole specifically. He was looking at the table. His jaw was set in the way it got when he was managing something in public that he'd rather manage privately. His name goes on something real, she said. That was the one thing I knew from the beginning. After in the parking lot, Dot hugged her. Not brief, not practical. The real kind, from a woman who had set down something heavy. Claire held on. Didn't say anything. Some things don't need words wrapped around them. Then Dot stepped back and looked at her with those sharp eyes. Harold would have liked you, she said. He liked people who fixed things. I learned from him, Claire said, indirectly. Dot considered that. Don't give him too much credit. He waited 30 years. She paused. Some people wait too long. Some people do, Claire said. And some people don't get to choose how long they wait. Dot looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, got in her truck and drove away. Russell found Claire by her car before she left. He moved carefully, the cane on the uneven parking lot asphalt, but he didn't slow down for it. I want to show you something, he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and brought out a brown envelope. Aged. The fold lines darker than the rest. The flap sealed with something that had once been wax. Henry sent this to my grandmother in May of 1938, Russell said. Before he went to San Francisco. Sarah never opened it. She was afraid of what it would say. He turned the envelope over in his hands. She gave it to my mother when she died. My mother gave it to me. I kept it in a drawer for 40 years because I didn't know if opening it would make things better or just more. What changed? Claire said. You did, Russell said simply. You made it so that opening it could only make things better. He held it out to her. She took it, held it for a moment. Would you come to the train car? I'd like Cole to be there when we open it. Russell looked at her. Then at Cole, who was standing 20 feet away talking to Deering. Yes, he said. I'd like that. They drove separately. The dirt road into the property was a different color in the late afternoon, light amber, where it had been pale tan in the mornings, the desert doing the thing it did with light, making the same landscape look like a different place depending on the hour. The train car stood on its track. Claire had painted one end the previous week, testing the color, the dark blue that Cole had mixed to match the original Union Pacific specification from records he'd found in a railway archive. The painted end caught the late sun and held it, a preview of what the whole car would be eventually, when Cole was done with it, when it was what it had been in 1938, the year Henry Alderman had hidden the truth in its walls. They went inside. Claire, Cole, Russell. Claire lit the kerosene lamp because the afternoon light through the windows wasn't quite enough, and the single bulb on the electrical hookup was too harsh. The lamp made the interior warm and slightly amber, the wood paneling coming alive the way old wood does in low, warm light. Russell sat at the far end, near the service counter, near the hidden compartment. He settled carefully, the cane leaning against the bench seat beside him. He looked around the car with the slow attention of someone understanding something they hadn't expected to understand. He worked in here, Russell said. It wasn't a question. For 12 years, Cole said. Russell nodded, put his hand flat on the wood of the bench seat, just left it there for a moment. Cole sat in the middle of the car. Claire handed him the envelope. He held it, looked at it. The return address, a rooming house address in a city that no longer had that street name, probably after 87 years. The recipient address in Sarah's hand, his grandmother's grandmother's name, and an address that had probably become something else a long time ago. But the letter had found its way, through Sarah to her daughter, to Russell, to here. Do you want to open it yourself? Claire said. Yes, Cole said. He did it carefully. The paper resisted slightly, not from damage but from age, from being sealed for a long time. The sound of it opening was quiet, just the paper giving way. Inside, two things. A letter, and behind it, folded twice, a typed document on Union Pacific Railway letterhead. Cole read the letter first, silently. His lips didn't move. His expression didn't change much, but Claire watched his breathing and it slowed. And then he took one breath that was different from the others and went back to reading. When he finished, he looked up at Russell. He knew he wasn't coming back, Cole said. Yes, Russell said. He told her he was going anyway. Yes. Cole set the letter on his knee, picked up the typed document. He read it faster, his eyes moving down the page. Then he went back to the top and read it again, slower. Edmund Aldridge's signature, he said. Yes, Claire said. She'd read it over Cole's shoulder. She'd seen the seal. She already knew what it was. He paid Sutton, Cole said. Documented it. Used his office seal. He lowered the paper. He was so confident nothing would touch him that he made a paper record of the payment. Men who've always been protected forget to be careful, Claire said. Cole looked at the document for a long moment. Henry got this in the last 10 days, he said. After he knew Sutton had told Aldridge. After Aldridge came to him directly. He still found time to obtain proof of the payment. He set the document down beside the letter. He was building the case even at the end. He was always building the case, Russell said quietly. That's what my grandmother said about him. She said her brother was a man who finished things. Cole picked up both documents, held them together. The letter and the proof, what Henry had written for his sister, and what he'd sent to protect her with. The whole weight of what his great-grandfather had done in the last weeks of his life, compressed into 2 pieces of paper that had waited in an envelope for 87 years. He didn't say anything for a while. Russell didn't say anything either. He sat at the far end of the car, with his hand still on the wood of the bench seat, and he looked like a man who had driven a long way to sit in a particular room, and had found the room was exactly what he'd needed it to be. Claire sat and let the silence be what it was. Outside, the desert was going quiet with evening. The raven that lived somewhere near the track called once and then didn't again. The temperature was dropping. She could feel it in the air that came through the partly open door, and the kerosene lamp made a small sound as the flame adjusted to a slight shift in the draft. Eventually Cole said, "We take this to Deering." "Yes," Claire said. And Pollard, "Yes. This is the last piece." He looked at the document, the signature, the seal. "This establishes premeditation. This puts it in the historical record not as probable but as documented." "Frank can file the amendment to the ruling," Claire said. "It won't change the outcome, but it changes what the record says about Edmund Aldridge." "It says he planned it," Cole said. "Not just that he did it." "Yes." He looked at Russell. "Are you willing to provide this to the court as evidence?" Russell looked at him steadily. "I drove from Wyoming," he said. "I didn't drive all that way to hold on to something that belongs somewhere it can be used." Deering filed the amendment to Judge Holt's ruling the following Thursday. The formal addition to the historical record of the state of Nevada now read that Edmund Aldridge had not only committed the theft of Union Pacific assets over a period of 2 years and ordered the silencing of the witness who discovered it, but had premeditated that silencing with documented payment to a Confederate prior to Henry Alderman's disappearance. Not a prosecution. Edmund Aldridge had been dead for 73 years. But the record, the permanent, official, searchable, citable historical record of the state of Nevada, Henry Alderman's name in it, exactly as it should be. The Nevada State Museum opened the permanent exhibit on the first Saturday of December. Cold morning, bright sky, the kind of Nevada winter day that looked warmer than it was. Claire had worked with the curator, a woman named Dr. Voss, who moved through the exhibit space with the quiet excitement of someone who had spent her career caring about things that had been forgotten and was rarely given a story this complete to work with, on the layout, what to show and in what order. The exhibit didn't begin with the gold. It began with the work. A life-size reproduction of a Union Pacific porter's uniform, 1930s specification. Beside it, the employment record. Henry Alderman hired 1,930 route assignments, performance notes, the commendations that appeared regularly in his file. A man who was good at his job and had 12 years of documentation proving it. Then the discovery, the shipping manifests with the discrepancies Henry had first noticed in 1,936. The secondary ledger he'd kept, cross-referencing the official records against the actual figures. The building of the case, month by month for 18 months. Then the photographs. Henry in his uniform in the photographs Claire had found in the hidden compartment. Clear-eyed and straight-backed, and beside them, in a separate frame, the family photograph Russell had brought. Henry younger, unguarded, his arm around Sarah, in front of a house that had probably been torn down decades ago. The two images together, who he was before and who he became. The same man. Then the documents, the leather portfolio under glass, the personal journal opened to the final entry, "I am going because I said I would go," the letter. And the payment document with Edmund Aldridge's signature and seal, now formally part of the state's historical record, displayed beside the amended ruling. Then the gold. Not all of it. 5 bars from Henderson. 3 tubes from the secondary cache. In a sealed case beside a timeline of Edmund Aldridge's career, the respectable version that had stood for 70 years, and beside it the corrected version, everything that had been hidden underneath. At the end of the exhibit, a wall. Large, white, 2 photographs side by side, the 1,936 photograph of Henry Alderman in his porter's uniform, the one that had traveled in the hidden compartment for 87 years, clear-eyed and self-possessed, and beside it, the photograph from Cole's wallet, Henry younger, caught rather than posed, the ease of someone who didn't know yet what was coming. Between them, on the wall, clean and plain, Henry Alderman, Chief Porter, Union Pacific Railway, City of Los Angeles Line, 1,931,938. He was not a thief. He was a man who wouldn't look away. Claire stood in front of that wall for a long time at the opening. Cole stood beside her. Russell was there, sitting in a chair Dr. Voss had arranged specifically. Meg. Deering, Pollard. A woman Claire didn't know who introduced herself as the granddaughter of a man who had worked the same Union Pacific line as Henry. In 1937, and who had been crying since she walked through the door. A historian from the university who had driven 4 hours and kept touching the glass over the documents with his fingertips like he was checking they were real. People for whom this was not just a story. People for whom it was the echo of a story they'd been carrying without the ending. Claire shook hands and answered questions and accepted thanks that felt too large for what she'd actually done. She said repeatedly what was true. She'd cleaned a train car. She'd noticed the dimensions didn't add up. She'd been too broke and too stubborn to walk away. Henry Alderman had done the hard part. 87 years before she was born. After the opening, Russell found her by the exit. He looked tired in a good way, the tiredness of someone who had done something they'd needed to do and could now rest. "Thank you," he said. "You drove from Wyoming," she said. "You carried a sealed envelope for 40 years. I was afraid to open it," he said. "That's not the same as courage. You opened it when it mattered," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, the gesture of a man who had something left to give. He brought out a small object and held it in his palm. A ring. Silver. Simple in the way of something old that had been worn down to its essential form. A band. Smooth. The kind of smooth that came from being handled daily for years, and then kept carefully for longer. "Henry sent this to Sarah with the letter," Russell said. "He took it off before his last shift. Said he didn't want to lose it on the train. He turned it over in his fingers. Sarah kept it her whole life. Gave it to my mother. My mother gave it to me." He looked at Cole, who was standing nearby. "I think you should have it." Cole didn't move toward it. He looked at his great-grandfather's ring in Russell's palm. "That belongs in your family," Cole said. "You are my family," Russell said. He said it without sentimentality, just as a fact. The way you state things that have been true for a long time and have only recently been confirmed. "Henry's grandson is my family. That's not complicated." Cole took the ring, held it. The kerosene lamp from the train car was in Claire's bag. She'd brought it to the opening for reasons she couldn't have entirely explained, just that it seemed right to have it there. And in the museum's winter afternoon light, Cole's hand holding the ring looked like a photograph. He turned and looked at Claire. She'd known something was coming. Not the specifics, just that the story had one more thing in it that hadn't been said yet. They walked back through the exhibit without talking. Past Henry's uniform, past the ledger under glass, past the family photograph and the amended ruling and the gold bars and the wall, with Henry's name on it in clean, permanent type. They went outside. The December air was sharp and still. The parking lot was half full. People still arriving for the later opening hours. Normal people on a Saturday morning who would walk in not knowing what they were about to find. Cole stopped walking, not far from the entrance. Just stopped, turned toward her. He wasn't going to make a speech. She knew that. He was not a man who made speeches. He was a man who showed up 18 minutes early and made dinner on a hot plate, and read his great-grandfather's letter in a courtroom without apologizing when his voice broke. He held the ring out to her, not in a box, not with ceremony, just held it out in his open palm the way you offer something you want someone to take. "My grandfather trusted a stranger to find his truth," Cole said. "I trust you with everything after." She looked at the ring, silver, small, worn to smoothness by a life's worth of daily use, and then kept for 87 years. The ring of a man who had taken it off before his last shift because he didn't want to lose it, who had sent it to his sister for safekeeping, who had walked out of the train car that morning, knowing what was waiting and gone anyway. She thought about $47, about a laptop at 12% battery and a classified ad on a website nobody had heard of, about a dirt road in Nevada and a door that hadn't been opened in years and the sound it made when it finally gave way, about a brass button in a corner that you'd only find if you were looking for it, or if you were a nurse who'd spent 12 years noticing when the dimensions didn't add up. She thought about Henry writing, "I am going, because I said I would go," and then going. She took the ring. Not because everything was resolved. The nursing license renewal had taken every cent she'd had left after the scholarship endowment was established, and the train car's wiring was not up to current code and would need addressing before the real cold came in, and she was still technically living in a train car in the Nevada desert on a section of track that went nowhere. She took it because Cole Patterson showed up, before he had a reason to, and made dinner on a hot plate without making it feel like a compromise, and had read his great-grandfather's letter in front of a room full of people and only broken once, and hadn't apologized for it. She took it because he was the kind of man who finished things. The same as his great-grandfather. She slid it onto her right hand. Not the left. That was its own decision. But she put it on, and it fit the way things fit when they've found where they were supposed to be. Cole looked at her hand. Then at her face. Right hand, he said. For now, she said. Which was the only answer that was honest, for now. Moving in a direction. The story still going. He almost smiled. Closer to all the way than he'd gotten before. Russell was watching from near the museum entrance. He had both hands on his cane and the expression of a man who had driven from Wyoming, and kept an envelope sealed for 40 years, and was now watching something that made all of it make sense. He nodded once. Then went back inside. That evening Claire drove back to the train car alone. Cole had gone to help Russell get settled at the motel in town. She'd told him she'd see him tomorrow. She wanted an hour in the train car by herself. She lit the kerosene lamp. Set it on the small table she'd built from plywood and 2 sawhorses that had started as a practical solution and had become, somehow, furniture. The lamp made the interior amber and warm, and the wood paneling did the thing it did in warm light, came alive, showed its grain, stopped looking like salvage and started looking like what it actually was, which was old-growth material that had survived nearly 90 years, because someone had built it to last. She made coffee on the hot plate, sat down with it. The silver ring caught the light when she moved her hand. She looked at it for a moment, thought about Henry taking it off at the start of a shift and putting it in his pocket, then sending it to Sarah because he wanted someone he trusted to have it, then Sarah keeping it her whole life and passing it down through 2 more generations, until it ended up in a museum parking lot in December, going from Russell's palm to Cole's palm to hers. Things that were supposed to survive found ways to survive. That was what the past 2 months had taught her. The truth in the hidden compartment. The gold at 6 feet under the Henderson property. Henry's ring through 3 generations. Her own ridiculous, stubborn $47 insistence on staying in a train car in the Nevada desert when every sensible calculation said to take Aldridge's money and leave. Things that were supposed to survive found their way. She got up and went to the hidden compartment, pressed the brass button, pulled the panel. It opened with the same small click it had always made, the same one it had made 87 years ago when Henry closed it for the last time. She reached in. Not to take anything out, just to check. The portfolio photographs were there, the ones she'd kept copies of. Henry's letter, the copy, the original now permanently housed in a sealed case in the State Museum where it belonged. The family photograph Russell had sent months ago, Henry and his wife and his sister Sarah in front of a house that no longer existed. The people he had been trying to protect. Her own journal, which she'd been keeping since the first week, writing in it at night when the desert was quiet, and she was trying to sort out what was happening to her. She put her hand on the journal. The last entry was from 3 days ago. She'd need to write another one tonight. She reached into her bag and took out a small photograph. The one from the museum opening, not an original, a reproduction Dr. Voss had made as part of the exhibit materials, a high-resolution print of Henry in his uniform from the 1936 photograph. The same clear eyes, the same quality of self-possession, but printed cleanly, the image sharp in a way the original had been blurred by age. She placed it inside the front cover of her journal. Then she placed the journal back in the hidden compartment, next to everything else that had been kept safe here, next to the truth that had waited. She closed the panel. The click, small, definitive, the sound of something secured. The same sound Henry Alderman had heard when he pressed this panel closed for the last time in the spring of 1938, the morning before he left for San Francisco, the morning he walked out of this car and didn't come back. He'd heard that click and known what was waiting for him and gone anyway. She stood with her hand on the panel for a moment. Outside, the Nevada desert was fully dark. Stars coming out the way they came out here, not gradually, not a few at a time, but all at once, the way things appear when the conditions are finally right and there's nothing left to obscure them. The Milky Way visible above the sagebrush. Cold air moving through the partly open door with the smell of sage and frost and distance. The train car stood on its 30 feet of track, the track that went nowhere, the same track it had always been, short and purposeless by any practical measure, a section that didn't connect to anything, that had never been part of a larger line, that was just here, in the desert, holding the car in place. $47 had been the end of one version of her life. She understood that now. Not the end of her life. The end of the version she'd been trying to maintain: the apartment, the careful budget, the performance of fine, the life that fit the shape she'd had in her head since she was 25. That version had ended. It had ended before she drove to Carson Valley. She just hadn't known it yet. What she'd found here wasn't a replacement for that version. It wasn't a better apartment and a clearer path and a husband who didn't leave. It was something she didn't have a prior category for. A train car in the Nevada desert. A scholarship fund in a dead man's name. A silver ring on her right hand. Work she was good at. A community of people who had come to exist around the specific shape of one woman paying attention at the right time in the right place. It wasn't what she'd planned. It was what was real. She turned off the hot plate, turned down the lamp, put on her coat, stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out at the dark. Henry Alderman had stood in this doorway. She thought about that sometimes, not with sentimentality, just as a fact. He had stood here and looked out at whatever 1938 Nevada had looked like from this stretch of track, and then he had gone to do what he'd said he would do. She'd found his truth. She'd done what he'd asked. She'd done what she said she would do too. The lamp threw a square of warm light through the window onto the desert ground. If you were far enough away, driving past on the county highway after dark, you'd see it, a lit window in the middle of the desert, on what appeared to be a train car, warm and stationary against the dark. She stepped inside, closed the door, the click of the latch, the desert outside, the stars, the cold, and inside, everything Henry Alderman had trusted a stranger to find. Still here, still held, going nowhere, already there.